Just real quick, I know this went too long. I'm recording it for a buddy of mine. I went too in depth. Alright, so I made an Odd Eyes deck. Figured I might as well do a deck profile. It's a really good budget deck. In my opinion, anything you want to call budget is going to be about 60 bucks because that's about the cost of picking up a new game. You know, for mainline consoles, all that stuff. So you should be able to get this deck for about 60 bucks at this point in time, but Yu-Gi-Oh prices are kind of weird depending on the ban list. So, just gonna go into the deck, explain how it runs, then, go through some of the ruling stuff because it's weird. It's like a ton of different rules based on summoning working together. Alright, so it's an Odd Eyes deck. So, first up, Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon. You're running it at 3. It's basically your searcher, your way of starting the deck, putting monsters on the field. It's an important card. You need to get your hands on it as quickly as possible. Immediately after that, we have Odd Eyes Performapal Odd Eyes Dissolver. I'm just gonna use shorter names for them because a lot of these cards have just ridiculously long adjective-filled names to make sure they're searchable by everything. But basically, this card works as polymerization. When it's in your spell zone, it is straight up polymerization, lets you fuse your monsters. While it's in your monster zone, it actually lets you fuse using its elf and a monster in your pendulum zone. So if you really want to, you can use it and Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon. Well, pendulum's in your zone, Odd Eyes Dissolver is on the field. Now, Dissolver has a secondary effect that I always forget about, but when a pendulum monster you control would be destroyed by battle, you can special summon Dissolver. Dissolver stops it from being destroyed for either that instance or that turn. But it's just a quick little way of doing things. And yeah. Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. Whole deck's built around this card. Its main effect is pretty basic. If it battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage is doubled. Its secondary effect in the Speller Trap zone, everyone basically knows this card. If it's in the zone, destroy one Speller Trap. Not one Speller Trap. Destroy this card, add a monster with 1500 or less attack. That's a pendulum monster to your hand. It's a good way to search during your end phase. Odd Eyes Phantom Dragon. This deck relies really heavily on 7s. Phantom is a level 7 and has two things going for him. One, his effect when he's in the pendulum zone, anytime a monster you have is battling, if you have another Odd Eyes card in the pendulum zone, you can increase the battling monster's attack by 1200. Which, not a ton, but is enough to make a difference between who wins and who loses. With some decks where the base attack for most of your monsters is 2500, so hitting for 37 on one monster every turn is pretty good. His secondary effect, when he is pendulum summoned, so either from the hand or the extra deck in your pendulum summon, and he inflicts battle damage, he deals 1200 damage for every Odd Eyes card in your pendulum zones, which that's a lot. Like 2400 is what you're going to be hitting with burn every turn. It speeds up duels and it can end them quickly. You want 3 of them. Astrograph Sorcerer. I'm not going to go into crazy detail on this card because, to be honest, it's probably getting banned on the next list. That's why I'm only running one. But it's just a crazy good card. When a card you control gets destroyed, it will go back and, of course, summon itself, searches the card that got destroyed if it was a pendulum monster. So then you get the card that was destroyed in your hand, you get this on the field, and you get the pendulum monster in the extra deck. It's just a lot of plus. And that's only one of its 2 effects. But there's no real cost to using it, and it blends in with too many decks. It's too generic. So that's why it's only at 1. Swap it out for some other searcher or a tech card. Supreme King Gate 0, just really basic card. It's searchable barely in the deck. The reason you use it is it's a level 7 and it has an insanely low scale of 0. So you can put it in the low zone, and odds are your Arc Pendulum is going to be in the high zone as your 8. So that gives you a lot of options, so you can summon any monster levels 1 through 7 pretty easily. So, Odd Eyes Persona. It's not the best card in the deck. It's a good card. It has really solid skills, not skills, effects, where it's got kind of bad stats with 1200 attack, 2400 defense, but its monster effect is when it's face up on the field, target one monster special summon from the extra deck, negate its effects. So it's a good way to screw with your opponent a little bit, negate them. And I have never used the extra deck effect. Not the extra deck effect, the pendulum zone effect, where if it's in the pendulum zone and something you have that's Odd Eyes gets destroyed during the end phase, it switches itself forward, and your Odd Eyes one from your extra deck goes into your pendulum zone, which I don't know. I've never found it particularly helpful, but you're running 3 of these. So, Supreme King Dragon Darkworm, this card's gimmicky. Like, you never want to see it in your opening hand. If you do, you're basically just going to use it to search Supreme King Gate 0. But when it's normal or special summoned, you get your Supreme King Gate 0 directly to your hand. You can search any Supreme King card, that's the only other one you run. And when it's in the graveyard, while you control no monsters, it summons itself out of the graveyard. Nothing huge, but it's not terrible. Rescue Hamster gives you a lot of recovery in the deck. You're mainly going to be using it not for the times when you're like, oh yeah, I have just a big board, let's extend further. It's a recovery card. You don't want it in your opening hand, but you can banish it from face up in your pendulum zone, and then it allows you to get 2 of the same monster with the same name out of your extra deck and add them to your hand. So, assuming you have 2 Phantom in your extra deck, you put Rescue Hamster in the zone, get rid of the hamster, then you have 2 Phantoms you can summon out of your hand, or 1 to set the scale and 1 to summon. Noble Dragon Magician. I wasn't a fan of this card so much when I was building the deck. To be honest, it's just crazy powerful, crazy important, and if Astrograph gets hit to 1, I'll probably bump it up to, 3. I'm running it at 2 now. But basically, you never put it in your pendulum zone, because the second it touches your pendulum zone, unless you have another magician card there, it dies and goes back into the extra deck. Unfortunately, you don't run any other magicians in this deck. But this is the deck's tuner, and what you can do with it is you take a level 7, and if it's a level 7 Odd Eyes card, you target the card. Noble Dragon summons itself out of your hand and reduces the level 7's level by 3, which means if you control your Odd Eyes in Noble Dragon Magician, you can pretty easily make your level 7 synchros by turning them into level 4s, using her as the 3, and you make a synchro. Now, summoning itself, it pulls itself out of either your hand or your graveyard. So if you put it in your graveyard first turn, or you use it for a fusion summon and it was in your hand, you can pretty immediately use its effect without a downside. That being said, if you put it in your extra deck, it's more or less a dead card unless you feel like pendulum summoning it back out. And if you synchro summon with it and the other monster you use is not an Odd Eyes card, it goes straight back into the bottom of your deck, so you're not going to see it again. And it can get a little cloggy if you're using it with non-Odd Eyes cards to synchro. Alright, Sky Iris. I didn't actually hit on Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon's effect yet because I wanted to explain it in conjunction with this card. So, this is the main engine of the deck. What Sky Iris does is when it gets destroyed, Sky Iris is target one card you control, destroy it, and add one Odd Eyes card from your deck to your hand. What Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum does is when an Odd Eyes you control is destroyed, you can special summon a new Odd Eyes monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So, in a perfect world, you'd open with these in your hand every time, one in your field spell, one in your Pendulum Zone. And let's say Dissolver is also in your hand. So you use Sky Iris, you pop Dissolver, Dissolver goes into your extra deck. You get to search an Odd Eyes Pendulum to your hand and put one on the field. So you just got a monster on the field, a high scale, and your field spell, which not only does it protect, you with more advantage, but your Pendulum cards in your Pendulum Zones cannot be targeted if they're Odd Eyes Magicians or Performapals, which is most of the deck. So, obviously, it's a really important card in the deck. You're running it at 3. Terraforming. Sky Iris is a field spell. You want to hit your field spell as much as possible. Terraforming is at 3. So, next up is Duelist Alliance. So, this card, when it's activated, you can add one Pendulum monster or one Pendulum spell or trap from your deck to your hand. You can only play it once per turn, and you can only actually activate it if there's a card in your Pendulum Zone. That being said, your regular Odd Eyes, and also your Arc, they're both monsters that have Pendulum in their name. So you can either get a 7 to your hand, or get your deck started very quickly just by searching your Arc if you already have your Sky Iris in hand. So, Spiral Flame Strike, this is an Odd Eyes exclusive card where it searches, it works for Odd Eyes, but in general, it's alright. But, so if you control an Odd Eyes, you can target one card on the field and destroy it. So, this effect is alright. It destroys any card on the field, so if you have an Odd Eyes anywhere on the field, you can just target one of your opponent's cards and destroy it. But also, if you have your Pendulum Dragon and your Arc Pendulum Dragon, or any Odd Eyes here in Arc Pendulum, you can activate Spiral Flame Strike to destroy your Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. That goes to your extra, and Arc summons something new from your deck, which is where you're going to do most of the summoning with it from until you get extra deck monsters on the field. Now, Spiral Flame Strike also has a second effect. You can only use one, but both are good. You activate it, add one level 7 Odd Eyes monster from your deck, or one level 7 face-up Odd Eyes from your extra deck to your hand. You're gonna use it to get through your deck, because the whole idea of this deck is to burn through your cards pretty fast. So you can search out a 7, that 7 goes to your hand, and with that 7 in your hand, now you can search your Pendulum, you can search Arc Pendulum, you can search Phantom. You have a lot of options to search with this card, or just use it to pop something your opponent has that's irritating. So, it's strong, you run it at 3. Summoner's Art. So, all this card does is add one level 5 or higher normal monster from your deck to your hand. You really want to open with your Arc Pendulum Dragon, so level 7 normal monster, add it to your hand. Alright, Odd Eyes Fusion. This card is good for either if you're going second, you want to see it in your opening hand, but what it is it's polymerization for Odd Eyes, where it's you summon a dragon type fusion from your extra deck using monsters on your hand or field as fusion materials. But if your opponent controls two or more monsters and you control none, you can actually use cards in your extra deck, and it doesn't specify face up. So you can use two face down cards in your extra deck to make it a fusion. But the cards you're using have to be Odd Eyes. Ignite Reload. So, just like the normal reload, you activate this card, you shuffle cards from your hand back into the deck, draw the same number of cards. In this case, you're only allowed to shuffle pendulum monsters from your hand back into your deck, draw the same number of cards, but you also get to draw +1, so you don't lose anything for playing this card. With Reload, you lose a card when you play it. This one, you don't lose anything unless it gets negated. Foolish Burial. Just, you're going to either want to put your Noble Dragon or your Supreme King Servant in the graveyard first turn. If you see it later, you're probably going to want to send your Noble Dragon just to get Noble Dragon back on the field. Soul Charge, it's a strong card, and it's good for recovery. This deck doesn't have a ton of recovery, which is odd for a Pendulum deck, but if you get board wiped, you want Soul Charge in your hand. Monster Reborn, it's off the ban list. It's so good. And last is Upstart Goblin. Just, you activate it, your opponent gets 1,000 life points, you draw one card. But it cuts your deck size down from the regular 40 to 39, which is pretty big considering how many searches you have. You want this deck to be small to specifically get Sky Iris and Arc in your hand. So I'm going to shuffle this, fast forward, and alright, so I'm back, and you probably just watched me shuffle fast forwarding, but I actually like to play a zone further back using this as my extra monster marker and these as the two extra monster zones. But I didn't actually go through the extra deck because I wanted to go through the rulings for the extra deck, because this is a pretty good deck to go through them all on because it can use every type of summoning. So, Fusion Summoning. This is pretty basic. So, you run 3 fusion monsters, 2 of which are the same card. So, Performapal Gatling Ghoul. Level 8, so it's alright. But you're not going to be able to get it off Odd Eyes Fusion. But you use your Performapal to make it. The Odd Eyes Dissolver. So, the materials are 1 Performapal monster, which is Dissolver, plus 1 level 5 or higher Dark monster. Now, when it's summoned, your opponent takes 200 damage for every card on the field. So, if you have a board of 10 cards, they just took 2,000 damage. Then, target 1 face up. Is it specifically face up? Oh no. Destroy 1 monster. So, any monster. It doesn't have to be face up. Your opponent controls. And that's if you use a pendulum monster as a material. Alright, sorry about that. Probably going to be a cut there. But if you used a pendulum monster as a material, you can target 1 card on the field. That's a monster. Destroy it, and your opponent takes damage equal to its attack. So let's say there's 10 cards on the field, they controlled the Blue Eyes White Dragon. You summon this, you activate its effect, you destroy their Blue Eyes White Dragon, and they take 5,000 damage. So it's just a fun little burn card that can end the game very quickly. So, Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. This is one of your most important cards, where you make it with 1 Odd Eyes, 1 Pendulum monster. And this is what you want to go into with Odd Eyes Fusion. It's a level 7, it fits the whole archetype. But when it's summoned, you can target one face-up monster on the field, return it to the hand, and the monster has to be in attack position, but, you know, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Most monsters are going to be. Now, also, once per turn, you can target one monster. Not target. When your opponent activates an effect, you can take one monster from your extra deck that's face up, so a Pendulum monster, shuffle it back into your deck, and then your opponent has the effect negated and you destroy that card. So it's a negate on the field, and every time it's summoned, which if it dies goes to the graveyard, you can resummon it off your Arc Pendulum. Every time it comes back, you get to destroy one monster on the field. Well, return it to hand. And both the effects are hard once per turns, so it doesn't pay to have two on the field. Alright, so Black Rose Dragon. Probably the synchro you're going to go into the least, but when it's summoned, destroy all cards on the field. That simple. Odd Eyes Meteor Burst. Exact same summoning condition. But when Odd Eyes Meteor Burst is summoned, you can take one monster from your spell and trap zone that is a Pendulum and special summon it. So that way you get two monsters when you just made one. And it's a very quick way to put 2 7s on the field to go into your XYZ plays. Also, when it is on the field and during battle phase, your opponent can't activate monster effects. So that's not huge, but it is something to keep in mind since everything about this deck has utility, and there's not a lot you can't think your way out of with this deck as long as you have resources. But these are going to be your go-to level 7. So for XYZs, you use a few more. You use 2 copies of Odd Eyes Absolute, which going to be your most common one. Basically, it's 2 level 7 monsters. You overlay them over each other, and when your opponent declares an attack, or you declare an attack, just any time an attack is declared, detach one material from it, then special summon one Odd Eyes monster from your graveyard. Which, that's big because when you detach a XYZ material, that's a Pendulum monster, they go to the graveyard. So if you made this card using 2 Odd Eyes, once per turn your opponent attacks, you detach one, you get your Odd Eyes back on the field. So it's a quick way to put a new monster on the board. Also, when this card leaves the field, you can special summon one monster from your extra deck that's an Odd Eyes, ignoring its summoning conditions. So the most common play you're going to do is your Absolute dies just by your opponent's actions, and you immediately summon Vortex into the same spot. So Vortex gives you a negate on the board and bounces one of their cards back into their hand. So it just, in general, is a very powerful card, especially when it comes out on their turn. So next up, Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon. So Flare Metal is odd because it doesn't fit the archetype, but every time your opponent activates a card, they take 500 damage. Just any effect that activates, 500 damage. And also, it cannot be destroyed by card effects. Which basically means it's a good second XYZ to put on the board, just to punish your opponent for playing once you already got them down to, let's say, 1,600 life points between burn, between battle, and Gatling Ghoul. Just put it on the field, put a time limit, and a number of plays they're allowed to make. I know I said you can make this deck for like $60. You're not going to be able to get the Ghoster for just anything budget friendly. I just had this, so get a lower rarity. I never like upping the rarity on cards. I just had this. Okay, Odd Eyes Raging Dragon. This is going to be perhaps the least summoned card in your entire deck. So it has a couple of effects. A lot of them you're unable to use, but when it gets destroyed on the field, rather than going into your extra deck, it goes into your Pendulum Zone, and it's a Pendulum 1. Then, if there isn't another card here, you get to add one monster from your deck to that zone, so you can immediately make a Pendulum Scale. That being said, it's just a 3,000 attack monster while it's on the field. There's nothing spectacular about it, and it has to be made using 2 dragons. So, whether or not it's worth it, not normally to make. But the advantage you get with this card is your Odd Eyes Fusion says you have to use an Odd Eyes from your extra deck, and Odd Eyes Vortex says you have to use a Pendulum. This is a Pendulum that lives face down in your extra deck. So first turn, you can play Odd Eyes Fusion, and voila. You use this and one other Odd Eyes as a material, and Vortex just hit the field. Galaxy Tomahawk. This is, without a doubt, the reason the deck can work as a Pendulum deck. Basically, when you make this card, it's just an average card you detach to, but it summons as many tokens to your side of the field as possible. Which, you know, it's kind of bad in XYZ or Synchro or Pendulum Era, but in Lynx, tokens count as bodies, so you can use them for a Link summon. So what you're going to want to do is put this card on the board, detach 2, fill your board with tokens, and your opponent doesn't take any battle damage, which is why there's quite a few burn cards in the deck. But it gives you quite a few Pendulum Zones to work with. And just as for your links, it's 2 copies of Proxy Dragon, Queefort Genius, which it has a relatively weak negate effect that can negate face-up cards, and the Trigate Wizard is there for its link zones. It should be a Firewall Dragon, but that card is half the cost of this deck, so Trigate does the same job, just worse. Alright. So, this is the card I'm using to designate my extra deck zone. You can use anything, but I'm just gonna run through a quick hand with it. Alright. So, this hand actually opened really well. This is exactly what you want to see. The Odd Eyes Fusion is a little bit superfluous, but we'll play as if we're going first, just for the sake of, well, smaller hand, less cards to keep track of. So you have Odd Eyes Phantom, Sky Iris, Persona Dragon, and Arc Pendulum. A lot of the cards in this deck are to specifically get these 2 cards, so just drawing them means I don't have to dig through the deck. So what you're going to want to do is you put your Arc Pendulum here in your extra zone, providing you with a scale 8, and you activate your Sky Iris. Now what you're going to want to do is you have your Phantom Dragon, and I kind of want to put Phantom on the field this turn. So I'm going to activate... You know what? Actually, let's play it as if it's turn 2, which the Sky Iris won't help, but assume my opponent has 2 monsters, so Odd Eyes Fusion isn't a dead card. So, Phantom is going to provide your lower scale, and this is around what your board should look like when you start actually doing your plays. So first off, you're going to use Sky Iris, activate its effect, destroying Phantom Dragon, who goes face up in the extra deck, and then you get to search for a Odd Eyes card to add to your hand, keeping things simple, just the plain regular Odd Eyes. But Odd Eyes Arc Pendulum also allows you to special summon an Odd Eyes from your deck. So, again with the keeping things simple, I'll put Phantom on the field. Now, Phantom is in your normal monster zone I put that a little too high. But this is my hand. I'm not going to set any spells or traps, but these are the zones you'd use for them. Here are your main monster zones. Here is your extra deck. So here's the hand you're working with. You got your Phantom on the field. You got to search your Pendulum to your hand. And you also got your Persona that you started with. So you're going to place Persona. So now you have a scale of 1 to 8. So if you wanted to Pendulum Summon right now, you can get your 1 out of the extra deck, and that goes to your extra zone. Which, that's alright, but you don't have enough extra zones to actually push a real advantage. So what you're going to do, instead, because your opponent already controls 2 monsters, and we'll just assume they're relatively weak, nothing to worry about, but it's enough to make Odd Eyes Fusion work, because you basically open with 2 dead cards if you go first. Well, 1 if you go first, 2 if you go second. But you activate your Odd Eyes Fusion, and as fusion materials from your extra deck, you're going to choose your... Let's go with 1 copy of Meteor Burst, and your Odd Eyes Raging. Now, these cards meet the summoning condition for Vortex Dragon. Now, anytime you fusion summon from anywhere besides the field, it goes to the graveyard, and the only cards that go to the extra deck are your Pendulums if you fuse with them on the field, if you Synchro with them on the field, if you use them for a Link Summon on the field. But if you use them for an XYZ, they go to the grave. So, using Odd Eyes Fusion, my opponent... Oh wait, that was actually an illegal move. I still control a monster. So, before I did this whole song and dance of, oh yeah, I'm gonna search, put Phantom on the field, I would have had to open with Odd Eyes Fusion. And Odd Eyes Fusion is on the field, I bounce one of their monsters, and these 2 cards go to the grave. So now, at this point, I redo my entire turn, assuming I had an empty field. And now, I'll overlay for an XYZ summon, and attach Galaxy Tomahawk. Now, this is the most fragile spot in the combo because you're basically risking everything you have on the field, because you have something in your extra zone, so if it gets negated, you can't play any further this turn. And it's not a great card, but what you're going to do is you activate your Galaxy Tomahawk, destroying it, and summoning 4 tokens. I'm just gonna grab whatever 4 cards I have closest. That works. Well, it's 5 tokens, and each of these is just a monster token. They're just cards I have laying around. So, the token you summon is a machine level 6 with 2000 defense and... No, 2000 attack, 0 defense, but your opponent doesn't take battle damage, so it's not like you could summon them all in attack mode after wiping your opponent's board and attack for game. So, first, these are all machine tokens, and this is a machine. So, removing a token from the field and sending Tomahawk to the graveyard, you're going to want to summon Qliphort Genius. And you need 2 machine monsters to make it. Now, as for your generics, the rest of these tokens, you just opened up 2 link zones. So what you're going to do is use 2 tokens. First is going to be a Proxy Dragon. There. 2 more tokens. And that's another Proxy Dragon on the field. Now, at this point, the available link zones you have are here and here. That's alright. It's not amazing. So what you're going to want to do, using this as a 1 and this as a 2, you're going to make a link 3. Now, because they're both link 2s, you could make a link 4. Link 4s are more expensive. And now, from the extra deck, Trigate Wizard. And now you have an extra deck zone here, an extra deck zone here, and an extra deck zone here. But if your opponent has taken this one, you can still summon to this one. Trigate Wizard being connected to it has no bearing. So, now, going to Pendulum Summon, which it's once per turn, summon any number of monsters from your hand or extra deck to fill zones. But if they come out of the extra deck, they need to go into an extra deck zone, which, that's alright, but it does mean that when you only have your scales and your hands empty, you're only actually summoning one monster a turn. But as many as you want can come out of your hand. So I'll make the Pendulum here, and this one's coming out of the extra, so it goes here. Now, if you had more monsters in your extra, you'd put the extras on the link points, which are where the arrows are pointing, and put the ones from your hand just not connected because they don't need to be. But XYZ summon, and make your Odd Eyes Absolute. Now, it's turn 2. The Sky Iris in your hand is still kind of useless, but what you're going to do is proceed to your battle phase, attack, and let's say you attack with Proxy Dragon, because it's the lowest attack. You're not actually able to deal damage this turn, but once per turn, you can use Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon to detach one, and Absolute lets you revive an Odd Eyes monster from your grave. So you can choose any of these, and because your Vortex was properly summoned, you could get Vortex back, but it's not common for you to open with a Vortex in grave, so I'm just going to put your Odd Eyes Pendulum back. And this is the board you end your turn with, where your proxy is only 1400 attack. It's not allowed to be in defense mode, no links are. But your opponent starts their turn, and you have a really irritating board to deal with right now, because this field spell protects your 2 Pendulum Zones. And Proxy Dragon has the effect of, if any card you control would be destroyed, you can destroy one card it points to instead. So that's any card you control. If they try and destroy a monster, or if they activate Mystical Space Typhoon trying to kill your field spell so they can kill your pendulums. So let's say they do just that. They activate Twin Twisters or Mystical Space Typhoon trying to kill the field spell. So they target the field spell, you activate Proxy Dragon, and destroy Absolute instead. Now, normally it's a pretty dumb play to destroy the monster on the field that negates attacks, but Absolute got destroyed, and it has the effect of, when it's destroyed, it summons a new monster to be attached. But we'll put that one up here in defense mode. You get to take one monster your opponent controls, it goes back into their hand. Now, as for Arc Pendulum, because you destroyed Absolute, you destroyed an Odd Eyes monster. So then you can summon from your deck and put a fresh new Odd Eyes card on the board. So for, I'll say next turn, I'll just put a 7 on the board. And now you have 2 7s on the board, which you can use to make another Absolute to keep it going. Or, if you just have Proxy pointing to a regular Pendulum Dragon, just proc it to destroy, and you get a new one. And this is a once per turn, but Proxy Dragon isn't. So you can negate basically 2 instances of destruction and just fill your extra deck for your Pendulum Summon next turn. And I think that's about it. I should probably make a video going much more in-depth on the rules for pendulums and all that stuff, but that's how you play the deck. I probably went on, holy shit, way too long.